because this aeroplane was built at Vickers Armstrong's factory at what we know as Harden or Broughton, for example, as well, on the 31st of May 1945, and it was a really significant homecoming for this aeroplane. It certainly hasn't been back to Harden too many times. In very short order, that being one of this type's most outstanding attributes, this is the Cessna L-19 National,
primarily flying University Air Squadron students and RAF Air Cadets. There are 13 air experience flights across the UK that offer flights to up to 20,000 cadets each year. This could be you if you're between 13 and 20 years old. 50 air cadets a year are now being taught to fly the tutor up to solo standard. After this conventional stall turn, Bob will enter. For those of you that are considering to go to university, there are 15 university air squadrons across the UK. On the squadrons, students are taught to fly the tutor by highly experienced military flying instructors, like Bob. It's worth mentioning that the UAS flying syllabus does include solo aerobatics. Bob will now enter the final section of display with an oblique loop and a half Cuban. The oblique loop puts the aircraft in flat form twice to the ground, so it's an excellent photo opportunity. With departing wave at 100 feet, it's our final great photo opportunity. A big thank you to Cosford Air Show for hosting us today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the 2025 Royal Air Force tutor display.
Thank you very much for that great display. Very important aircraft around these here parts, of course, with the only aircraft. So while we just stand still, mesmerised by and how nice to get the chance to see that being done on a Jaguar at what really is the home of the Jaguar in RAF service these days. It certainly is now. Here with the engineering school. Those ground displays, and there's one really special photo opportunity. If you haven't been to see it, you really should take time before the end of the day. Right to the far right-hand end of the airfield as you look out towards the runway, you'll go up into a revetment area, which is been created here really for other various new ideas before you're committed to the full-size, full-power, all-singing and all-dancing main aircraft. And yeah, DA4 in there, which was the second of the UK 4. It was imported to the UK fairly recently, joined the airshow circuit last year, and it is a P-51D model, but it's an Australian-built one, a Commonwealth CA-18 Mustang, and there are some subtle differences between it and the American-built aeroplanes. It is a particularly gorgeous example, I have to say. Taking the runway now, named Jersey Jerk, and we'll explain why when the aircraft returns to display. There's the Mustang then, on the roll to get into the air and hold off while the Typhoon displays. So So we are now just a couple of minutes away for what I think will be one of the highlights. An engined example of the Mustang, the American automobile manufacturer Packard, producing the famous power plant under license. If ever there were an aircraft that's an example of Anglo-American cooperation in military aviation, this aeroplane, the North American Mustang, is it, because it was produced to meet a British requirement. Famously, a British purchasing commission in New York City was on the search for potential new American-built fighter designs for the Royal Air Force during 1940. They visited was North American Aviation in Dallas, Texas. We had the idea that potentially North American, which was still quite a new company at that point, albeit already building the Harvard trainer, one of which we'll see later, in quantity for the RAF, could build the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk for the RAF under license. However, North American had other ideas, and it came up with a design it called the NA-73. Its progress, that design, from initial conception to first flight before the end of 1940 wasn't quite as rapid in terms of the number of days involved as has sometimes been stated, but it was nonetheless astonishingly quick, and it produced a highly advanced fighter in aerodynamic terms. The aircraft duly went through flight testing and was earmarked for operational service, and indeed entered service with both the US Army Air Forces and the RAF, known to the Americans as the P-51, in fairly short order, also known as the A-36, as a ground attack and dive bomber platform to the Americans, in which role it was very successful. And all that was with the Allison V-1710 engine, which was an escort fighter. But that was where Britain again really entered the story, because the then commanding officer of a unit based at Duxford called the Air Fighting Development Unit, which evaluated new aircraft and new capabilities for the RAF during wartime, Ian Campbell Ord, was talking to a friend of his, a man called Ronnie Harker, who was a service liaison test pilot for Rolls-Royce. And between them, the idea was hatched that wouldn't it be a good proposal to engine this, as I say, very streamlined fighter, and thereby transform its performance with a Rolls-Royce Merlin. A Mustang was duly converted with a Rolls-Royce built Merlin. It was test flown at the Rolls-Royce factory airfield at Hucknall. Immediately, the transformation was clear. Rolls-Royce couldn't fulfill the sort of demand that was required, though, to produce the Merlins for Mustang production on top of Spitfires, Mosquitoes, Lancasters, and the like. So that was where Packard entered the story in the United States, licensed producing the Merlin, and this was where the legend of the Merlin Mustang was born. very late in the war, particularly the RAF flew them for low-level reconnaissance roles during the D-Day period. But it was the Merlin-powered versions, like the P-51D that we see represented here, that were the great long-range escort fighters for the US 8th Air Force in the European theatre, and indeed for the US Army Air Forces out in the Pacific as well. This Mustang, which will be coming into land as well. And the markings, I mentioned the fact that this aircraft is named Jersey Jerk. That was the personal moniker applied to a P-51D that was flown by one of the most notable 8th Air Force names of the Second World War, Donald Strait. He was assigned to the 361st Fighter Squadron stationed at Martlesham Heath in Suffolk. Initially equipped with the P-47 like we saw earlier. Strait wanted to name the first P-47 that was allocated to him as Jersey Bounce, but his crew chief had other ideas, his crew chief being named Doc Watson, who was described later by Strait as a real tough kid, a leather worker from Boston. Strait put forward this idea of calling his Thunderbolt. The name stuck, and Donald Strait, who had enlisted in his state's National Guard before joining up formally with the US Army Air Forces, and later on served long into the post-war years with the New Jersey Air National Guard, is commemorated by this Australian-built Mustang of fighter aviation engineering.
And if you look away to your left-hand side as the Mustang is making its approach to land, you see that very curved fighter approach to the airfield. Well, if you imagine you're sat in the cockpit of a Mustang looking forward, you have very little forward visibility, especially when the aircraft comes into landing attitude and the nose gets higher and higher. Virtually no forward visibility, kind of like driving with your bonnet up. So many of these fighters make what we call the curved fighter approach, which is staying very tight to the runway, turning very tightly towards it, so you can at least keep sight of the runway for as long as possible, in this case out to the left-hand side of the canopy, and then kicking the aircraft straight.
On board, Red 10, the ground supervisor and commentator for the Red Arrows, in readiness for their display slot. Now, coming up is something very nostalgic, I'm sure, for quite a few of you in the crowd, because it's an aircraft you won't just have seen flying. I'm sure quite a lot of you will have flown in them, or maybe even flown them yourselves if you were members of Air Experience flights and University Air Squadrons of the past. One of the greatest training aeroplanes of all time, and I very much hope the cloud base for the display we're about to see is sufficient to allow it to proceed in full, because this team that we've had at Cosford on occasions in the past has never been an aerobatic team.